Good evening, all, and welcome to Worse, stories of strength and inspiration from the old days. Times are tough, but we'll get through this. We've been through worse. Today we start off with the Christmas truce. This is something some of you may have heard of. And by the way, my dinner tonight will be hamburgers cooked on the grill, and experiment in cooking baked potatoes on the fire. And what I'm drinking tonight is a Lagunitas IPA. They are not a sponsor. We don't have sponsors yet. It's made in Petaluma, California, and Chicago, Illinois. So welcome aboard. I hope you'll eat and drink something you enjoy too. World War I was a conflict that was supposed to be impossible because among the nations of Europe, the leading ones being Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, the Ottoman Empire, in addition to many others, the economies and cultures and financial systems were so interlinked that it was believed that any conflict would be brought to a fast conclusion by self-interest. But that's not what happened. The heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary was assassinated by a radical from a small country, Serbia, and this activated a series of alliances and set in motion a series of calculations that led to 4 years of war and killed over 10 million people. So, in August of 1914, when war was declared, people all over the civilized Christian world were enlisting in droves, sure they'd beat the other side and be home by Christmas. They didn't know that a new kind of war was upon them, brought about by advances in technology, and this is key, defensive tactic and strategies. On the Western Front, where Germany tried and failed to deliver a knockout blow against France in the first month of the war, the fighting seesawed back and forth until both sides dug in and trench warfare became king. The methods of attack were old-fashioned, cavalry and huge masses of men with rifles, but the methods of defense were 20th century, machine guns, barbed wire, and lines of trenches behind trenches for defense in depth. So by December 1914, more and more men were being drafted, and nobody believed in a short war anymore. On December 7th, a date which would live in infamy, but not for another 27 years, when an even bloodier war had begun, on December 7th, Pope Benedict XV called for a temporary hiatus of the fighting for the celebration of Christmas. He asked, quote, that the guns fall silent at least upon the night the angels sing. His plea was officially ignored on all sides. Nevertheless, it did gain some traction in that there were informal, haphazard, and unauthorized truces along parts of the Western Front on December 24th and 25th. So that's a historical summing up. But let's look at how it looked to some of the people in the trenches. And I'm pretty sure we get that expression from World War I, being in the trenches. So on Christmas Eve, German army officer Walter Stennis observed that all the shooting had stopped on both sides. A subordinate came up to him and said, "Do you think this is a trick? Are the British about to attack?" Stennis judged that they weren't. And on that night, they began to sing Silent Night, a hymn beloved of people all over the English-speaking world, but that originally began its life as Stille Nacht and was written in German. So the next day, a British private, Marmaduke Walkington, how's that for a name, wrote, "We were in the front line. We were about 300 yards from the Germans, and we had, I think, on Christmas Eve, we'd been singing carols and this and that and the other. The Germans had been doing the same, and we'd been shouting to each other, sometimes rude remarks, but more often just joking remarks. Anyway, eventually a German said, 'Tomorrow you no shoot, we no shoot.' And the morning came, and we didn't shoot, and they didn't shoot. So then we began to pop our heads over the side and jump down quickly in case they shot, but they didn't shoot. And then we saw Germans standing up, and this was unheard of in trench warfare, where both sides had plenty of snipers, and if somebody so much as stuck their helmet this far above the top of the trench, they would get killed. They saw a German standing up, waving his arms, and we didn't shoot, and so it gradually grew. Someone else said, "I remember the Christmas day when the Germans and the French soldiers left their trenches, went to the barbed wire between them with champagne and cigarettes in their hands. Some Germans, it was reported, lit Christmas trees. And I'm pretty sure the tradition of a Christmas tree started in Germany, and placed them on the edge of their trenches. In at least one place, and this is something that's widely discussed, a game of soccer was played between sides. And amidst this, each side also took the opportunity to retrieve their dead from no man's land and bury them properly. One British historian, John Keegan, more on him another time, called the Christmas truce the last flicker of the 19th century. It was a farewell to an age of chivalry as a new mechanical age was beginning. In a few years, there would be tanks on both sides. Before long, there would be airplanes fighting. Commanders became concerned that such interactions as the Christmas truce sapped fighting spirit, and they discouraged any live and let live actions by soldiers in following years. But among the many things we have to be grateful for in 2020, most of us are not at war. God bless those who are, but most of us aren't. And if you feel low this week, go on YouTube and search Christmas truce, and you'll find some selections that will warm your heart. So I want to thank the National Catholic Review Online. I'd like to thank History.com and the website of the British Imperial War Museum for the information shared in this. And also, I want to let you know that there is a theatrical reenactment of the truce written a few years ago called All Is Calm, with music of the time and the text of actual letters written by people who lived it. And that is available on PBS. I want to check it out. I hope you do too. All right. Trapped in the snow for Christmas. We now move from bullets to freezing temperatures. So a movie came out this year called Centigrade, about a couple trapped in a car in Norway in 2002 and how they survived for days even though she was 8 months pregnant. Now, what caught my eye about it is that the director of the movie told Entertainment Weekly that the movie was based on about 10 true stories. Some of them are sad, some of them are numbing, literally, and that people sat in stalled cars for days. But some of them are impressive stories of beating the odds, and not a few. So here's an example. In December 2013, James Glanton and Christina McEntee were driving through the wilderness of Nevada with their 2 children and Christina's niece and nephew when their Jeep spun out of control and ended upside down in a ravine in below zero temperatures. This group of people, 4 children and 2 adults, survived by lighting a fire, heating rocks in the fire, and placing those rocks inside the car's tires. Now, I can't really picture this, but that's what the report said. All 6 of them were rescued 48 hours later, alive and frostbite-free. Now, there's a little lesson there, which I'm going to draw out for you in a moment. Here's another one. December 2011. An Arizona State University student left her mom's house one night to drive back to school. After 4 hours of driving, she was trying to go through a national forest and reach a locked gate. She tried to turn around and got stuck. Her phone was dead, and pretty soon from the cold, so was her car battery. Then a storm dumped 2 feet of new snow in the area. She survived in her car with melt water to drink and 2 candy bars for a week and a half. The area was so snowbound that when they finally found her, they couldn't even get a 4-wheel drive vehicle in there. They had to take her out in a snowmobile. She made a full recovery. I want to see if anyone else has joined us. Yes, hello, Sally. Hello, Pat. Hello, Julie. Welcome. Want to say a quick hello? Back to our story of surviving freezing temperatures. Mostly happy stories. Now, this is the thing. Some of these stories of people trapped in the cold in the winter, in their car or not, they don't necessarily end happily. But a common element of the more tragic ones is that the people leave the vehicle and go to find help. Now, there's a lesson there. A vehicle is shelter. And I would also venture to add a vehicle is easier to find than an individual, especially since the vehicle is probably by the side of the road and the individual may not be. So, lesson for all of us. But boy, you look up stories about trapped in a car in the winter, and you really go down the rabbit hole. Backpacker magazine, Outside magazine, woman falls 100 feet off a cliff and breaks her back in the wilderness. Guy mauled by a grizzly twice with photos. An article called Severe Hypothermia. Yikes. By the way, one of the reasons to hike, or I guess even drive through the wilderness with a friend, is that when hypothermia comes on you, one of the first things it does is addle your judgment and your ability to understand the situation. So if you have a friend there, they can take a look at you and figure out if you're starting to show some of the warning signs of hypothermia. And the pros call them the 4 umbles: stumbles, mumbles, fumbles, and grumbles. So here's a story of a couple of people who did manage to stay together during a time that they were in crisis, but not necessarily in the best of ways. So December 2013, Adam Herman was hiking with friends by Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Now I see Sally has joined us. She lives up in New England. You've probably seen a lot more bumper stickers than I have that say, this car climbed Mount Washington. Well, going by car is the easy way. Guys we're talking about here were on foot. So experienced enough hikers use the term like avi danger to describe the risk of an avalanche, which these folks clearly and unfortunately underestimated. So they were going across an avalanche, a new field of new snow, and our hero, Adam Herman, suddenly felt the whole ground level out underneath him. And he realized that the whole snow of the hillside was about to collapse into an avalanche. Next thing he knew, he was flying through the air with white in all directions. He woke up on what appeared to be the surface of the ground, and not everyone who goes through an avalanche is so lucky, with a broken arm, a pain in his back, and a few feet away, poking up at him through the snow, his own boot. Fortunately, his foot was not still in it. His friend Connor approached him, covered in blood, his face a mass of bruises, and said to him, "Who are you?" Dead giveaways that he had not hypothermia, but a concussion. So it's estimated that Connor and Adam fell 800 feet. They were hiking with 2 other friends who called to them from a distance, they themselves having escaped the avalanche, and 5 hours later they brought help. So the avalanche tips that followed this article in Backpacker magazine were kind of disturbing. It sounds like being in an avalanche. Imagine being in a really bad wipeout and on a surfboard in enormously large waves, but as soon as the water starts moving, it turns solid. So that's what happens. If you're in an avalanche, keep swimming for the surface, because as soon as the thing comes to a stop, you're going to be encased in snow. And as it begins to come to a stop, try to use your hands to create space around your lungs so you can breathe, and around your face, so you have some chance of moving around and hopefully calling for help. So reading all this stuff is like, it's like rubbernecking at accidents on various strangers' roads of life. But then I came across this one. And again, thank you, Backpacker Magazine's online presence, but I also found this on a website, I believe it's called the Courier News, a newspaper in New Hampshire. Anyway, Pam Bales, and again, this is around Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Pam Bales was a volunteer with the Pemigewasset Valley Search and Rescue Team, and for all know, she may still be. So the thing about Mount Washington, which has famously, it's killed 150 people in as many years, is that as far as I can tell, the top of Mount Washington seems to stick up directly into the jet stream. So when Pam checked her weather report for that morning, her being an experienced hiker who does things like that, down at ground level, she was able to just wear a sports bra and good boots. At the top of the mountain, it was already 60 to 80 mile per hour winds. So anyway, she started her hike, and way above the elevation where anybody should be dressed lightly, she saw sneaker tracks. So she followed these tracks to a man slumped against a boulder in a light jacket, a layer of snow covering his soaked clothing. He was unresponsive, but he slightly moved his head, so she knew he was alive. She changed him into spare dry clothes that she had with her, another sign of an experienced hiker, and coaxed him to go down with her back down the mountain after he warmed up a little bit. She had a lot of those crushable hot pads with her, and she packed them in his gloves and in his armpits and around by his kidneys. Finally got him to the point where he was able to follow her down the mountain. But he kept trying to give up, and at one time he laid down in a fetal position in the snow, and she said, "We're in this together." When they got to the parking lot, he was better. She gave him back his clothes, he got in his car, and he drove off without saying much. So she reported the incident at the search and rescue headquarters, and which a few days later got a letter with a small donation. I was called John by the woman who saved me. I went up my favorite trail, Jewel, to end my life. Weather was to be bad. I was dressed to go quickly. Next thing I knew, this lady was talking to me, changing my clothes, making me warmer, and she just kept talking and calling me John, and I let her. Finally, I learned her name was Pam. Conditions were horrible, and I said, leave me and get going, but she wouldn't. I did think about running off, but I wanted only to take my own life, and I think she would have tried to find me. With all that had been going wrong in my life, I didn't matter to me, but I did to Pam. I became very embarrassed later on, and I never really thanked her properly. But if she is an example of your organization, you must be the best group around. Please accept a small offer of appreciation for her effort. My deepest thanks, John. So there's a story of someone who set out to freeze in the winter and didn't. Before we continue on to our last item, I'd be curious to know, and feel free to take yourself off mute, is there anyone here who has a story of surviving in the winter, or an inspiring story that they have heard of surviving in the winter?
Well, I just sort of posted that we use, Jim, can you hear me?
Oh, I sure can, yes, I'm just turning. Please go ahead.
That we used to live in the Northeast Kingdom, which is pretty close to Canada, and we'd get these incredible wind chills. And
let me just clarify, folks. The Northeast Kingdom is the northern part of Vermont.
Yep.
So,
way to go. I forget that not everybody knows that because it's New England.
That's all right. Go for it.
But we were on a vast trail that all the snowmobilers would come on, and one night about 3 o'clock in the morning, we heard a knock on the door because someone had run out of gas on their snowmobile on our property. We had about 30 acres, and evidently when he went home, his father really yelled him out, because you don't when you can get up to 60 degrees under zero, you don't do that to yourself. It's just too dangerous.
You don't run out of gas, right?
Right. That part of Vermont, you have motion sensors, lights for the animals, but you keep your door unlocked in case anybody's in trouble. That's sort of what the Northeast Kingdom is about.
Wally, I'm going to remember that. I love that. Motion sensors to drive away the animals, but the door unlocked for people who need help. Love that. Love that. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh? All right. Okay, so now let us move on from bullets to frostbite to insults. This portion of the show is called Thick Skin, the Every Actor Ever story. So we now go, yes, I once worked with a famous actress, I won't say her name, who opened a Broadway play back in the days when reviews came out in print, not online. And she was very excited to find out what the critics had to say about how she had done in the show. Let me see, I just had a little momentary, there we go. And back in those days, if you stayed up long enough, most shows open on a Saturday, if you stayed up long enough into Sunday morning, maybe 3 a.m., which is dinner time for half of New York, you could see the Sunday morning paper as it was delivered to newsstands, literally hot off the press, with the reviews of the new shows. And the paper whose review could do more than any other to make or break a play, unless this is still true in New York City, was the New York Times, what they used to call the Gray Lady, back when the New York Times was still resisting the urge to put color photographs in the paper. The experience that people hope for on those early Sunday mornings is the kind of experience that Lin-Manuel Miranda had in 2015 after Hamilton opened, when the review began with the line, "Yes, it really is that good." So on this long ago night, this actress that I'd worked with had a different experience. So she was very anxious to read the review of her play, and with no table handy, she came out of a newsstand or convenience store, moved beneath a streetlight, and opened the paper right on the sidewalk. I'll call her Miss So-and-so. And there she read in black and white, Miss So-and-so has so much baby fat on her face that she can barely open her eyes. Can you imagine? I mean, can we agree this doesn't even deserve the name of a review? She told me that she was on her hands and knees on the New York sidewalk, leaning over the newspaper, crying. Fortunately, she's had a lot of great experiences before and since, but I don't envy her having that. Now, it's an extreme example, but in an odd way, it could be worse. I mean, most actors I know have had a bad review, and it's a toss-up whether you'd rather have them attack your appearance or your acting. I mean, looks come and go, but if they're saying you're terrible at your job, you're kind of sunk. So, as you know, as many of you know, stage actors have a labor union. It's called Actors Equity Association, founded in 1919, I believe, back in the days when, as the director Tom Haas once put it, actors made 25 cents a week and all the pasta they could eat. This was back in the days when producers might actually lock actors inside the theater during final rehearsals and wouldn't let them out till they got it right. But even in the modern pre-COVID era, the unemployment rate among actors is about 90%. So if somebody says you're not good, in a way that's worse than criticizing your appearance. That's an earthquake. So, and the feeling of being at the mercy of a stranger with a column in a paper. I was in a very fine production of Arthur Miller's All My Sons at a terrific theater, the Denver Center. It was a big break for me. It was a total honor to be working at this theater. And the only things that the Denver Post, the reigning newspaper in Denver, didn't like about the show were me and the AstroTurf on the set. So I thought I was done in Denver. Luckily, the theater did agree with the critic. But writers of shows can get skewered just as badly as actors. One of the things that the New York Times was infamous for back in the 1980s was a critic named Frank Rich. And one well-informed friend of mine felt that he was out to destroy the theater. He was so nasty to so many shows. And it seemed that the power went to his head, and he knew that a bad word from him could close a show on opening night. So Stephen Sondheim in 1981 opened Merrily We Roll Along, music and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim, one of the great composer lyricists of all time. The Times creamed it. Frank Rich said that its lines are labored retreads of wisecracks from another show. The choreography is uninspired to the extent that it exists at all, and we watch it with an ever-mounting sense of regret. So my temporary sympathies to Stephen Sondheim. But when a play's really bad, critics try to top themselves in slamming it. And you could probably all think of times when this has happened in movie reviews too, and they can actually be a lot of fun to read. But I remember hearing years ago, one of the most infamous statements was that a critic said, yes, my seat in the theater wasn't very good. It faced the stage. So I don't know who said it. I don't know what they said it about. I Googled it, nothing came up. But here's the New York Times review of Dracula the musical from the early 2000s. There were 3 Dracula-based bombs on Broadway in the early 2000s. And Dracula the musical was one of them. The Times said, it just isn't much fun to trash something that's so eminently, obviously trashable. Dracula the musical isn't simply bad, which is an aesthetic state of being that's kind of fun if you're in the right mood. It is bad and boring. So, yikes. I feel especially bad for Kelly O'Hara, famous, gorgeous, talented actor who sometimes I just watch on videos to learn from her musical phrasing. She was in this show. There was an effect where in a flash of lightning, she went from fully dressed in the middle of the stage to stark naked. So anyone who's willing to get naked in a play on Broadway, I feel like they're really kind of taking one for the team. And my heart goes out to her for making that kind of sacrifice in a play that just sucked. So anyway, but now that the world interacts online, everyone can be a critic in the comments section. And unlike professionals, they're anonymous. You may have heard of Brene Brown. Any of you folks, maybe just a quick show of nodding heads. Any of you folks heard of Brene Brown, the psychologist? Yes. Yeah, I'm a fan too. She has one of the most successful TED Talks of all times, over 60 million views. And after this enormous success, she made the mistake of reading the comments, which her husband and her therapist had told her not to do. Statements like, less talk, more Botox. I feel sorry for her kids. Of course she embraces shame. Look at what she looks like. So her recovery from the hurt consisted of 3 days on the couch, binge watching TV, and most importantly, deciding that anonymous criticism is the work of a coward. So power corrupts, even when it's just the power to hurt someone. A friend of mine said that she was described in a theater review as having all the warmth of a cold speculum straight from the fridge. I had to ask her what that was before I understood the true horror. She said, and it was a woman reviewer too. She's had a lot of successes, so she is well recovered from that horrible statement. But I may be lucky that the worst I got was in a college production of Damn Yankees, where they said of me, if only Mr. Riley could hit high notes the way his character hits fly balls, this would be a good show. So before I want to hear from you folks, but I just want to say toughness is admirable, comes in many forms. I admire the people who do triathlons, the shipwreck survivors, the trench warfare survivors, the people who outlast a siege when they're greatly outnumbered. But for just a minute, just before Christmas, it's good to recognize the thick skin of people who take a beating in print and go on stage the next night with a smile on their face. Have any of you folks received or heard infamously bad reviews that you care to share with us? Anyone just take yourself off mute?
Yeah. On bad reviews for my job. I'm not going to share them though. Sorry.
Outside the realm of theater.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't act.
Right.
But, thank God I don't act. I mean, like, laugh. But anyway, I'm always amazed. You know, having worked at the Shakespeare Theater as a volunteer for almost 9-10 years, I'm always amazed when people come out of the audience and they're like, oh, how horrible that was. And all of us are like, what show did they just watch? Yep. There was a production of Hamlet with, oh my goodness. Oh God, it's going way back. And this person walks out, oh, a horrible show. And I'm like, I saw that show like 9 times because I had free tickets, but I love that show, 3 hours long. Mm-hmm. But you wonder, who are these critics? What do they know?
Right.
So
they don't always know that much.
No.
My friend told me that somebody came out of a production of Anne Frank that he directed at intermission and said, I kept asking myself, when is she going to go blind and deaf?
Oh, no.
They had her mixed up with Helen Keller. So, yeah, reviewers are not always and even audience members are not always the most informed. But
ain't too bright either.
Anybody else before we wind up?
Well, Jim, I have to mention a production that I believe we were in together, King Lear, at in the Shakespeare Theater at Louisville.
Yes.
And so I'm going to sort of flip it and say that production actually received a very good review, and yet we were dressed as half human, half lizard.
Yeah.
And
oh my God.
Cordelia, and I wore a nude leotard, unitard, painted, you know, to look as if it were truly my body. And then over that, I had football shoulder pads and a chenille bedspread with a hot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So you're saying this is the flip where like the reviews were good, but
I was so horrified to be a part of this production that I could barely, I couldn't sleep. And yet it received rave reviews from the Louisville newspaper. And I remember there was a lovely, I believe Adrian played the fool, and he said, you know, darling, if you quit now, you'll never have the story to tell. And so here we are.
And it is so funny you said that as the person who played that role, Julie, because years later I was in Indiana and somehow it came up and somebody said to me, you were in the Lizard Lear? He said, Cordelia was a tent? What? Yes. What were they thinking? Yeah. So, yes, some people had the sense to know it was a terrible idea. But
That's right. We suffered through it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's horrible.
Thank you, one and all. Those of you that I'll see Friday, I look forward to it. Have a Merry Christmas and a Merry Christmas Eve. We'll be back in just a moment with you, me, and Shakes. Just going to take a little hiatus here. Thank you so much. Grab yourself something to drink or eat if you want. I'll see you in just a moment.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.